Join me in the audio garden to cultivate our collective wisdom, nurture creativity, and spread love. My name is Martha Cinader. Welcome to Listen and Be Heard. Yes, welcome to the audio garden. I have a very special guest with me here in the garden today, Laura Lengnick. She's worked for decades to put sustainability values into action as a researcher, policymaker, educator, activist, and farmer. She led award-winning soil health and sustainable farming research at the USDA and served as a lead author of the USDA report, Climate Change and Agriculture in the United States, Effects and Adaptation. Laura founded and owns Cultivating Resilience, LLC, and serves as the Director of Agriculture at the Glenwood Center for Regional Food and Farming, and lives in Asheville, North Carolina. And she's been a guest here each season now for 3 seasons on Listen and Be Heard, as we have an ongoing conversation about climate change, what we can all do to make our world a better place for everyone and to be resilient in the face of climate change. And today we're going to focus on alternatives to capitalism. We're going to have a wide open conversation, talk about some of the books that we're reading and what they have to do with the whole subject. So what does climate change have to do with capitalism? You're not sure? Or maybe you do have a good idea and want to hear more. Either way, we will be back soon with that conversation, but I want to start off in the right way with a poem. And this poem is called If I Told You What I Know.
If I told you what I know, you would not believe me. So I will tell you what I do not know. I do not know how bad it will get before things get better. How many more we will lose to drought and flood, fire and famine, to mass incarceration, mass extinction, to hate crime and domestic violence, to the police, to TV and toxic food. How many more we will lose to pollution of our waterways and airwaves and bloodstreams, our livers and rivers and oceans and imaginations. How many to the war on terror and drugs and Crips and Bloods and thugs and babies and gays and immigrants and indigenous peoples and differently abled and madly genius and schizophrenically gifted, and the war on thinking and the war on love. How many more we will lose to the lust for enough money to bribe God to turn the other way. If I told you what I know, love is stronger than hate, and truth is more enduring than any form that lies can take. If you are not willing to change, I know nothing will change. Life is teetering on the precipice of our willingness to let go of what is killing us and the earth's forgiveness for what we have spoiled. Regeneration is the natural order of existence. Destiny will give birth to itself, respiraling the cycle of the universe's chest rising with each breath. Will we be there to exhale?
That was the voice of Naima Penniman, and this is Listen and Be Heard. My name is Martha Cinader, and I'm joined in the studio by Laura Lengnick. Welcome, Laura.
Welcome. Thank you for that opening.
That
so
was
powerful.
Beautiful.
Such powerful message. Yeah.
And it's a great opening to our conversation today. We want to talk about alternatives to capitalism in the light of climate change.
Mm.
Why? Why should we be having this conversation about capitalism?
Well, the simplest answer to that question is I think it's reasonable to argue that capitalism has led to climate change and many other, and maybe even all of the other ills of our times, racism, sexism, and so on down the line. Capitalism is, from my way of thinking about it, is at the root of a lot of the exploitation and subjugation of land, people, and community.
So for people who might be questioning that a little bit, or who might be saying, well, I'm American and Americanism is capitalism.
Mm.
How would we say that, how would we address people who have that beginning attitude to say, maybe this is worth thinking about, and maybe it's not un-American to think this way?
I think I would respond to that reaction to what I just said by encouraging people to think about the basis for this country, democracy, and all those other Americanisms. There's so much about this country, and we hear about it almost daily, that has more to do with sharing and cooperation and being aware of the value of community. And capitalism, the way it's practiced today, really works hard at breaking down all of those basic values, which I just spoke about as American values, and they are. However, they really are values that are shared widely around the world and are most fully expressed in indigenous wisdom about how to live well with other people in this place. So those basic values of, for example, honesty and reciprocity and care for the land and the people that you depend on for your own life, those are very old and very widely shared values. And capitalism, as it's practiced today, works at breaking down, or maybe another way to say it, or a way I think about it is taking our attention off those values and putting it on other things like consumerism, for example.
So consumerism, we could almost equate that with capitalism in a way. I think maybe that's the biggest, well, I wouldn't say the biggest behavior you're targeting, but I think what I'm trying to get at is that if we want change and we agree, say, that, we need to move on from capitalism, I think that evokes in a lot of people's minds like revolution or violence even. And yet it's capitalism, like the colonialism that is actually violent in and of itself in the way it treats, people, the earth. So when we try to imagine, like, moving beyond capitalism, does it have to be like a violent change, or do you think there's a way for us to imagine this happening like in a loving, caring, creative sort of way that would eliminate the need for that type of violence to happen to have change?
That's a big question. I think it's absolutely possible. One way I think about that nonviolent change, I think about it as a quiet revolution, and I look for, in my own work, examples of where communities are actually experimenting with new ways of thinking about economy, with new ways of defining wealth as something beyond money and beyond consumption of goods. And so I believe that we could make this transition without a lot of violence and resistance, particularly because I say that knowing that we're in this time, in this country anyway, but really around the world, of every group, every position ramping up the differences.
Violently disagreeing.
And violently
right?
disagreeing, yes. So
Yes.
I recognize that we're in very troubled times with regard to accepting other points of view and maybe trying to have an actual conversation about it. However, put that aside for a minute. I recognize that's a challenge, but what I also see happening around the country, and I'm hopeful that we're heading that way more as a nation, is new discussions of what I've been taught we call new ground. We're not looking for common ground. There are groups all over the country promoting civic or civil discussion of ideas. And I think where I've seen the most fruitful examples of that is where we stop with this idea that we're going to find where our values overlap, that common ground,
and just
go with it,
mm-hmm.
and accept that there are parts of that vision that we don't agree on. Instead of doing that, some of the best consensus building kinds of and community building kinds of projects that I'm aware of, they're actually inviting communities in with different community members with different perspectives. And the invitation is, let's find new ground together. Obviously, the beginning of that search is going to be around shared values. But what I think I've seen when I've read about these efforts or been a part of them over and over and over again is that people, regular people, they all want the same things. They want to feel safe. They want to have enough food to eat. They want to feel that they can raise their children well and have the kinds of social benefits needed to raise happy, productive, educated children, be a part of the decision making in their community, and so on. And so once you're able to create, what I've seen is that once you can create a safe space for folks to get together and really talk about what matters to them, you can get beyond these, what I see as artificially amped up differences that have pretty well destroyed civic behavior and civil conversations in this country.
This is Listen and Be Heard. the hour for writers and readers. My name is Martha Cinader, and I'm in conversation today with Laura Lengnick, author of Resilient Agriculture, and we are talking about alternatives to capitalism. So what kind of things would we be reaching for as we're thinking about alternatives to capitalism? I know myself as a reader and writer, I turn to books for ideas and inspiration. And I think you do too. We could talk a little bit about some of those books, but maybe you could lead us, in a direction of how to begin approaching the subject and our neighbors in a way that we can get to that next level of conversation, to the beyond level, beyond where we are now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, my own journey into alternatives to capitalism really is rooted in my work to understand resilience in agriculture and climate change adaptation. And so my own approach to answering this question and beginning to envision something other than capitalism, or we could talk about it as beyond capitalism perhaps, is I turn to nature. The work that I do very much involves understanding and then cultivating the natural resilience in healthy ecosystems and or healthy natural systems. And the kind of science that I do, social ecological resilience science, social, people, ecological, nature, bringing people and nature back together. And in that remembering of how we live well in nature, that's the path to solutions that I've worked on.
And capitalism, I would say, this just came into my head, is what has made us forget most of that, right?
Absolutely. Capitalism, and also another word that I'm using a lot today is colonialism or decolonizing culture. And so I think this separation from nature is bigger than just capitalism. And I think we've been or perhaps the way to say it would be sort of intellectual ideas, particularly in Western Europe, have very determinedly and step by step separated humans from the rest of nature because...
And from our feelings, really.
Well, and our feelings, right? Too, because we are natural beings.
Right.
And we naturally...
And so on one side, we have this like capitalism where you have to grow all the time. There has to be growth. There's never like a winter season where things don't grow.
Yeah.
Or where they're not expected to grow.
Yeah.
And that's a very fundamental difference between capitalism and the natural world that is being imposed on our natural cycles as well.
Yeah. Well, there are many fundamental differences, in my view, between capitalism and how nature works.
Right.
And yes, having no rest is
But you're suggesting we use nature as a model.
Yes.
So how could we use that in practical terms as a model to move away from capitalism? Like, I guess we're trying to consume less and be more appreciative of what we are consuming and where it comes from.
Yeah. Yeah, there's actually, I'm not an economist, and so I'm a learner in this space of thinking about capitalism and alternatives to capitalism. Mm-hmm. But I'm very excited about some new ideas that are, in the last 5 years or so, have really begun to be shared and discussed. And you can think of these ideas as occurring under this banner of what's called regenerative economics. And I was listening to the opening poem and realized that Naima mentioned that in the poem when she said, regeneration is the order of nature, something like that. I may not have it quite right. But that really struck me in that poem, and I think that's right. And so there's different groups of people around the world that are economists and mathematicians and physicists and ecologists who are joining together to create a new kind of economics to take us forward. And this new economics recognizes that the health and well-being of people rests within the health and well-being of the planet. To say something like that, when I say that out loud, I think, of course, duh, and yet our economic system, our political systems, and many of our communities are governed in direct opposition to that idea. So even though it seems like such a simple...
And we participate in it. And we're sort of like this being put into these pegs and holes. We're like pegs in the wrong holes or something. We don't necessarily want to participate in all of this, but we get up in the morning and we go about our lives, and this is the structure of our lives.
Yes, and structure is a great word. And I want to invite everyone listening to give yourself a break, because we are all caught in this capitalist structure, and it's structural. It's a structural frame that is a very heavy lift, and we're all being harmed by that lift. Some more than much more than others, and so. How do we begin to break out of that or begin to make changes? That was the other amazing, for me, statement in the poem that we heard at the start is Naima said, if you are not willing to change, nothing will change. And I think that speaks directly to individual responsibility to take a step back and look at how they are a part of this structure that is capitalism, and at the same time recognize the limits of individual change and step into your power as a community member to make change.
So there is an element that we do have to come together to make these changes. We can't all just say, well, okay, I'm going to do this list of things that I'm supposed to do, and then things are going to change, or the climate change is going to regulate itself better if, I don't waste my food, which I shouldn't be wasting.
Right. But there's a lot of evidence now and a lot of great writing around this idea that this individual change is actually a diversion. It's actually put the emphasis on change
once again
away from the major actors that need to change, and on individuals.
Right. Save the world. Do your laundry this
whatever
way.
It is.
Yeah.
Eat your organic Twinkie,
right.
And feel good, I mean, all of that is part. There's this idea, it's a very old book. Daniel Quinn wrote it, and I think it's probably 40 years old at least by now. It's called Ishmael, and it's this incredible, it's really sort of a mythic tale, a conversation between a human and an ape. And it really is addressing a lot of the issues around the separation of humans from nature. And one of the ideas in that book that I have kept with me since I read it, as a relatively young person, I was in my early 20s when I read it, thinking about my life and my work and how I was going to make a difference in the world. And it really stuck with me. And this phrase is the murmuring of mother culture. There's this mother culture, and I would say that that's this systemic capitalism, the systemic harms of capitalism. Every one of us, every day, we are in little ways being put in our place, being reminded of what is the right way to act. And it happens continuously, and it's particularly overwhelming in this day of social media and marketing, just the way everything.
And it's hard to see the forest for the trees. So we have to constantly try to be seeing beyond that kind of veil in a way.
Yes, but it's also very difficult to do that.
Yes.
And I don't think there's some huge conspiracy somewhere out there, although there are friends of mine that will tell me you're silly to not think that. But there's this, the structural aspect of capitalism is such that in every little moment and in every interaction or relationship that is expressed in your day, you're getting these messages around what it is to be happy, what it is to be cool, what it is to be whatever, what it is to be a good citizen, what it is to be, a green citizen or a good person. And all of those things tend to divert our attention from what really needs to change.
Which is very basic and elemental.
Well, it's very basic, but it's not easy because, as I said, it's a heavy lift. We're all living within this culture. I called it systemic, and you called it structure, But I really actually think about it as we're in this culture, and we're all moving through it, and we're getting all of these signals from the culture about how we should be. It takes a lot to be able to step back out of it and think about it and start making changes.
And we need each other's help to do that. We can't really each do it on our own, as we were saying.
Yeah, we need each other's help, and we need to also start acting like citizens. I think we need to take our power back and reimagine. I mean, it's not really just reimagining capitalism. I think we need to reimagine democracy as well. So these are big ideas that we're talking about today.
Well, let's hold that thought and take a little break. And when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about what we've been reading to help spur our imaginations in that direction.
I see the smoking guns telling everyone that it's going down. We got floods coming up the coast, people leaving homes. Tell me where they'll go now. Look around and see the warning signs. Every morning rise, see the storming tides. Well, I ain't waiting for the day I change what I do today. Yeah, I'll be making way.
Someone told me the climate is changing, and all we can do is watch as it warms. Somebody told me that we could reverse it by changing the stuff we buy in stores. But the stakes are enormous. I'm talking floods and forest fires and storms. So I'm thinking that we can make progress by changing the climate of norms. The climate of what's cool and what's taboo. Cause we've been in this place before. It's kinda like segregation in the South before MLK kicked in the door. It's kinda like apartheid in South Africa before Nelson Mandela walked free. It's kinda like gay people trying to get married in the States before 2015. Those laws all needed changing, and so do the laws we have now. Only this time the laws are passing oppression down to your grandchild. Now it's someone in a coastal city in a developing nation being treated unequal. Cause 1 meter of sea level rise displaces 100 million people. But the cultural climate is changing too. We can feel that as social animals. Whether or not your neighbors have them is the best predictor of you getting solar panels. You're not gonna stop people from competing with each other or keeping up with the Joneses, but you can channel those competitions into clean energy explosions. You can amplify the upside of heroic sustainability leadership. You can celebrate success stories and spread the message over digital media. You can name and shame offenders and call for the end of fossil fuel subsidies.
This is Listen and Be Heard Radio, WLBH.org. Welcome to the Audio Garden. Let's cultivate our collective wisdom, nurture creativity, and spread love.
The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison.
Once it's heard, it can't be unheard. Once it's published, it's not going to be unpublished. Once you read the poem, you can't unread it. No matter how an individual may try to push it to the side, forget about it, it's still in there. And it's the words, the meaning, the feelings behind it are taking root in their psyche, and they can't get rid of it.
By Sarah J. Maas. This book is gay by Juno Dawson.
PEN America reported while the movement to ban books is driven by a vocal minority demanding censorship, a 2022 poll conducted by the American Library Association found that over 70% of parents oppose book banning, leaving many public school districts in a bind. We want to hear from you to contribute to our banned book segment here on Listen and Be Heard. You can use your voice memo app on your smartphone and record a short message. Introduce yourself, just your first name. Hi, my name is. Record no more than 2 to 3 minutes. Hold the phone about an inch or so away from your chin and find a quiet place to make that recording. Email it to us at bbooks@listenandbeheard.net. bbooks@listenandbeheard.net by hitting that share button in the app. All these instructions we'll also have at listenandbeheard.net. And when you submit that recording, please share with us your name if you'd like to be added to our mailing list, and also that you give permission for Listen and Be Heard to include your voice in the radio show and in the podcast. Thanks.
I am joined still here by Laura Lengnick in the audio garden, and we are talking about alternatives to capitalism. That's a big subject, isn't it, Laura?
It sure is. It sure is. But we're making progress, I think.
Yeah, we don't have like the answer for everyone either, do we?
No, not at all.
But we're reaching for it, and that's what we all really need to do. And I know one of the ways I reach is by reading new ideas, reading books. And I'm curious, what are you reading to reach for
the new economics,
the new horizons?
Yeah. Well, I really appreciated this question. It gave me a chance to really think about what authors or writers that I'm reading that have had a big impact, really, or a lasting impact on my thinking about this. And I made a little list here, and as I was telling you before the show started, it was so exciting and inspiring to me to see these writers all listed together. So I thought I'd just share a little bit.
Please do.
And again, all of these writers are folks that have really helped me along the way on my journey to think about regenerative economics as this new economics. And the theme of my work, as I said earlier, is I'm really seeking how we remake economics in the as nature, in the model or pattern of nature, and very curious about what that might look like and who's working on that and that particular idea. So this is economic. These are writers that have all addressed economics with nature as model. The first, I'm sure many of your listeners have heard of and probably read is Braiding Sweetgrass, the book Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer.
Absolutely. That's just such a classic book. If people have not read it, I recommend it, not only because it's just so wise, but it leaves you feeling hopeful.
For me, another real value in that book was just her writing is so beautiful. I could get lost in that sense of this language and how it's being used and the messages. She writes about, in different ways, the blending of traditional logical knowledge and scientific ecological knowledge. And she does it, for me, in such a powerful way because she's
a botanist.
Yes, she is a botanist. Yep. And she uses the idea of the three sisters. So that very classic kind of North American indigenous approach to intercropping. The three sisters are corn, squash and beans. Yes. And she writes about how the way forward, or at least this is what I got out of her writing, was that the way forward is not to discard scientific knowledge, but to leaven it or mix it with local knowledge and indigenous knowledge, and to do that in a way that intertwines them. And I find that is, for me, so powerful. It's such a powerful metaphor. Because if you don't know the Three Sisters metaphor, look it up, but short and sweet. Each of those three plants, in the case of thinking about blending scientific knowledge, or we can think of it as modern knowledge, with indigenous knowledge, each of those plants is providing support to each other. So using this metaphor, the scientific knowledge in some ways is an improvement over the traditional knowledge. In other ways, the traditional knowledge brings in aspects of living well on this planet that got lost.
Completely.
And so bringing them together as the overall result or yield from bringing all that together is much higher. I've thought about that in terms of how do we blend what we know or integrate in a new way what we know about economics from indigenous wisdom and from modern wisdom or scientific wisdom, if you will.
Right. And actually, one of the ways we could do that is through this land back movement, to actually cede some of that authority back to the people who actually know how to do that.
How to live well. Yeah, exactly.
I think there's a movement, for instance, to return some of our national forests and so on to control of indigenous...
Of the peoples that were moved
here.
Yeah. And I would say that's also an important part of this idea of a new economics.
Yes.
As well.
Essential, probably.
Yeah.
Similarly in the Amazon, and there's a big movement there to return land to Native people, for not so much like to kick people off the land, but to return the custodianship of the land, how to take care of it and and allow it to regenerate, as opposed to just stripping it of everything.
Right, or exploiting that land.
It. Thank you. So Robin Wall Kimmerer.
Robin Wall
top
Kimmerer.
of the list.
Yeah.
Braiding Sweetgrass. What
Although
else?
these books aren't, they're not in any
necessarily
priority order.
1, 2, 3,
no,
but she's definitely up there as a classic, and recommended to help people wrap their heads around how to think about this.
Yes, and particularly how to reclaim our indigeneity, our sense of having a place in nature. We are part of nature, rather than nature is something that we go and get things we need.
Right, and to have some gratitude, too, for all that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is a big element.
Yeah, so much wisdom in that book. A second book that came to mind is by Reshma, and this is going to be a weird collection of books. I'll just warn you right now.
I love weird.
But Reshma Menachem wrote this beautiful, but he's a somatic psychologist, so he works with, I'd never even heard of that kind of psychology until I read this book, but he basically is a psychologist that works to help people heal embodied trauma.
That's something I've been learning a lot about lately. Not from that, I've never heard of that book, but I think a lot of people are writing about that now, including our guest last week, Jen Soriano, wrote a book of essays called Nervous. And she related the trauma, in herself from her grandmother going backwards. And so there's a lot of this going on, and I think our whole consciousness is kind of moving forward in that direction.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think no matter where you stand in our culture, there's trauma that is influencing behavior, and to have more awareness of it, and particularly to be able to heal it.
And capitalism is
oh my
trauma.
gosh,
It's the
it
trauma,
traumatizes
right?
everyone.
It's like, what do you call it? We're in continuing stress disorder with capitalism.
Absolutely.
The C could be for capitalism.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Riesman's book, My Grandmother's Hand, was in many ways transformative to me. But in particular, when thinking about a new economics, hit the last chapter in the book written, and this is a pretty interesting book because he decided to have chapters write to 3 different audiences: white people, black people, and policemen.
Wow.
And so each chapter, they're interwoven through the book, but they're written to different audiences. And if that intrigues you at all, go check out.
That does intrigue me. I've never heard of anything like that before.
Yeah.
Interesting choice of groups of people.
Yes. Wonderful, important lessons, and again, beautiful writing. And I think,
what's the biggest lesson you got from that book?
Yes, so I want to talk about that. And so the last chapter for white people in the book is a call to action to change white culture. Very, very straightforward, very much wake up, white people. You have a place in this transformation. You have an important role to play in reimagining culture. And in his case, and from his perspective, he was thinking about how do we move into a new culture that doesn't traumatize people. I mean, he's thinking about it in writing 2 ideas around psychology. So that has remained an inspiring chapter to me. I read this book maybe 5 years ago and regularly go back to that last chapter just to remind myself of the big picture of what my work is about. And it is to bring about this new white culture that is nature-based and that is healing and doesn't exploit others for our gain. There's so much there. So that's really important, has been an important book for me. A third one, Rupa Marya. I think I mentioned this in an earlier...
I think you did, but go ahead and talk about it again.
Yeah, very briefly. Her book, Inflamed, inflamed me. I mean, it is such a careful discussion and presentation of how our bodies are living examples of the trauma of capitalism and colonialism. She's a internal medicine doctor. She goes through each chapter is set up in terms of different body systems, circulation, breathing, your brain, and those, and then very careful and very detailed and fully cited discussion around how modern culture, or she presents it as colonialism, insults each of our body systems in ways that cause inflammation. For me, it was fascinating book. And then also wonderful discussion around.
There's another book called The Body Keeps the Score, and I can't think of the author's name at the moment, but it talks about almost exactly the same themes that you're talking about now.
Yes. And in every chapter, she also has, which is important to me, makes a read particularly useful to me and satisfying. She also brings up examples of alternatives, of alternative communities or different things that have been tried to address each of those body system inflammation. So really excellent book. And then the last three that I want to mention, and I want to mention them as a group, because actually one way that I find relief or, satisfaction, joy, taking a break from all these big ideas that I work in all the time is reading fantasy and science fiction. And I've just three came to mind as I was thinking about speaking with you today. N.K. Jemisin, in particular, her Broken Earth series, which is really an exploration of decolonizing culture and what that looks like, and the conflicts that would come or that do come as a culture is decolonized.
I think it's important for us. This is a show for writers and readers, and I think that's an encouraging thing for a writer of fantasy to hear from a scientist.
Wow.
Oh, I need to take a break and let this person's imagination open my mind a little.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's extremely important work to do.
I think so, too.
And this is why I keep wanting to have these seasonal conversations with you, because writers everywhere, this is how, we can contribute to this evolving consciousness that's going to take us beyond capitalism.
Absolutely. And offer a little relief along the way.
Right. It maybe, the journey can have some joy, right? And even we have to be able to take that respite, like even we have to sleep, and have dreams.
Yeah.
And so that's it's part of the process, right?
Yes.
So Ursula Le Guin, who else?
Oh, well, that was N.K. Jemisin.
Oh, I'm sorry. I got ahead on your list.
That's okay. Another one, which is really a weird oddball to include in this list, Terry Pratchett, an amazing British author who has written just a slew of novels and that are basically satire on our modern culture, but done in a way that it's laugh out loud funny. Beautiful writing and laugh out loud funny.
So we can have some fun.
We can have some fun.
While we talk about these things.
And he's addressed many of what we could call the ills or the harms of capitalism in his books as major themes. And the one that came to mind that was relevant to today was absolutely hilarious book called Making Money. So if you don't know Terry Pratchett, I'd encourage you to go out, if you're interested in economics, to maybe try his Making Money book. And then the last one, very recent, I read this book in the last month by Ursula Le Guin, who's someone that I know well. I know her writing well. But this is a little book that I'd never heard of called The 4 Forgivenesses. And it's 4 little short stories collected in one volume that address the challenges of cultural change and how to overcome, resolve, and forgive as a path towards making that transition to a new culture. And thinking today about speaking with you, I thought, wow, that kind of story is so needed as well in these days as we think about how we're going to resolve all the conflicts in our culture.
So there's some reading options for our listeners, and we have come almost to the end of our hour, Laura. It went by very quickly, but you came in here telling me that you would like to read a little bit of a poem to finish, and so I would like to invite you to do that now.
Okay, happy to do that. It just so happens it's also by Naima Penniman. We started the show with her reading her own work, so I feel completely inadequate to actually read her work. But a poem that Leah Penniman has written, a new book. It may be about 2 years old now, called Black Earth Wisdom, and it's an exploration of the indigenous roots of environmentalism in American Black culture. And again, reading that book has been it's opened my eyes and helped me understand how we struggle with this blending of indigenous wisdom and scientific wisdom. And Leah's book is a wonderful example of how to do that, models of different Black environmentalists who do that really well. So the last chapter of Leah's book is this poem, Mama Nature Told Me. And I just want to read a little excerpt of it. You can find Naima performing it online in a YouTube, and I highly recommend that you go there and watch her. But I'll give it my best here. This is it, and for me, the themes of this poem are really about how we use nature to reimagine our own culture. Mama Nature Told Me by Naima Penniman. Mama Nature told me we have more than enough to go around. She showed me a glowing paper birch at the edge of the forest on a south-facing slope, endowed to grow twice as big, with all the sunlight it could ever drink. It could tower over, shade out the rest. It disperses its surplus sugars to boost other trees instead. Could we be like that? Let go of excess, practice fair distribution of sustenance regardless of what slope we're born on. She showed me the interspecies marriage of algae and fungi who fell in love across kingdoms, birthed a new life form capable of making home on stone, adept at staying alive in the harshest conditions. Could we be like that? Join forces across difference, weave our powers individual but undividable in the midst of unthinkable circumstances. Learn how to flourish together. Mama Nature told me transformation is inevitable, adaptation is essential, change creates openings. We need to do what has never been done before until together we transform the atmosphere, build soil over stone, and patiently, unmistakably change the entire world. Could we be like that?
Indeed, could we? Thank you so much for joining me today, Laura. We talk to authors here at Listen and Be Heard. Like Laura, an expert on resilient agriculture, and I do recommend that you read her book. I did, and that's why she's been coming back to this show. Not the only reason. We're having what I hope is a very productive and creative conversation that's been stimulating for me, and I hope is also stimulating for those of you who are listening. And we've included Meredith Lee in a couple of those conversations, and she will be returning to Listen and Be Heard. We talked about several books, and I'm going to put all of that information on the post for this podcast episode with Laura Lengnick, which is our winter climate change special. And so you could go to listenandbeheard.net to find that information, as well as some other things that Laura has shared with me by email for further understanding of the complex picture of climate change and resilience in the community, resilience in our food supply, and so many other things, not the least of which is to love each other and to listen and to be heard. Next week, I'm going to be in conversation with Meg Reed, the executive director at Hub City Publishing in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and we'll be talking about pathways to getting published, and also the poet laureates of Greenville, South Carolina, because we have a teen poet laureate as well. And they are the first poet laureates of South Carolina. That's Glennis Redmond and Anna Castro Spratt. So I'm looking forward to that conversation next week. As always, thank you to Davine Dial, the General Manager at WPVM in Asheville, North Carolina, for introducing Listen and Be Heard to the broadcast airwaves. DJ Jeannie Hopper is my associate producer. Jeremiah Cothran does editing. Music and sound loops by DJ Jeannie Hopper and J. Rodriguez Sierra. My name is Martha Cinader. I want to thank you for listening and for the opportunity to be heard.
Living it, giving it, having it, taking it, moving it, shaking it, creating it, loving it. Living it is loving it. Living it is sewing a coat, investing each stitch with magic, creating a unique design, putting it on and wearing it the rest of your life. Living it is knowing that what you see, what you hear is tangible. It's being a rock in the river and being the river too. It's hearing, you'll never be able to do that. Living it is knowing you will do it. It's speaking the unspoken. It's thinking the unthinkable. It's doing the unexpected. It's quitting before you get fired. Living it is giving it is having it is taking it is moving it, shaking it, creating it, loving it. Living it is loving it. Living it is loving a man you're not supposed to love. It's giving way to emotions, creating commotions, calling attention to yourself. And I got that. Living it is learning from someone who can actually show you. It's cleaning your teacher's house or helping her to find one. It's never ever saying J-O